From a young age, you were taught to see yourself through eyes that weren't your own. And that's how the first mirror was born. Not of glass, but of expectation. A mirror that didn't reflect who you were, but who others hoped you would be. And you learned to shape yourself not out of vanity, but survival. Because approval became shelter. Every gesture began to carry the silent question, am I enough now? The mirror grew with you. It lived in the details, in the praise that never came, in the silence that hurt, in how someone looked at you before you even spoke. Slowly, you stopped seeking truth and started seeking permission. The mirror told you if you were good, if you were lovable, if you could rest. But the mirror lied, because it only showed what others could see, and what others saw depended on what they themselves could not face. You became a master of pleasing, of predicting, adjusting, preventing rejection before it came. But the more you adapted, the further you drifted from yourself. It was like drinking salt water. The more you tried to quench the thirst for acceptance, the drier your soul became. And every time someone said, "You're amazing," a quiet voice whispered, "If they really knew me, would they still say that?" That doubt took root, and the mirror no longer needed a wall. It lived in every gaze, every post, every outfit. The reflection moved into everything, except you. There's a kind of tiredness no sleep can fix. The tiredness of performing, of measuring your words, adjusting your tone, hiding your thoughts. It's the exhaustion of living as if constantly being watched, as if you're always on stage. And often you don't even realize it. You just feel the weight. Not from what you do, but from what you're always trying to hide. The quiet fear that being yourself might not be enough. You say yes when you mean no, smile when your chest is tight, compliment when silence would be more honest. You slowly dim your light like a candle burning for everyone but itself. And every time you shrink a little, the mirror applauds, says you're doing well, that you're safe, that you're pleasing. But deep down, you know, there's no safety in not being whole. The thirst for approval is deceptive. It wears the face of kindness, empathy, generosity, but there comes a point where giving too much becomes self-abandonment. And you've crossed that point so many times, you no longer know where offering ends and losing begins. That's where the emptiness is born. An emptiness no one sees, because on the outside, you're still polite, admired, functional. But inside, something's missing. The feeling of being with yourself. And then, without knowing why, you feel lonely even when surrounded. Because the applause doesn't touch you. The praise doesn't warm you. The presence of others doesn't reach you. Because none of it is for you. It's for the version of you who learned how to hide. At some point, you stopped trusting your own voice. It didn't happen all at once, and it happened quietly. Every time someone winced at your truth, every time your spontaneity was called too much, every time your silence was mistaken for weakness. Slowly, you stopped speaking, not just with words, but with feeling. You started asking the world before asking yourself, can I think this? Can I feel that? And without noticing, you outsourced your own existence. The mirror that lies doesn't only lie about how you look, it lies about your worth. It says you're only lovable when you meet expectations, when you're easy, when you don't make waves. But who said love has to be comfortable? Who said being whole means being accepted all the time? You were shaped to fit into forms that were never meant for your shape. And every time you forced yourself to fit, you left a piece of yourself behind. The reflection didn't just shape how you appeared. It began to shape what you believed. And the cruelest part is that the image created by others started to feel more real than your own sense of self. So you began to admire yourself on the outside while doubting yourself within, living among compliments that never touched your soul and silences that screamed of a forgotten truth. The thirst for approval muted your essence and left, in its place, a character. Someone who looks like you but who has never truly rested inside your skin. You believed love meant never disappointing. That to be good was to always be available, agreeable, contained. And without realizing, you made your soul a neutral ground where no one would trip, where no one would feel too much, where no one would be bothered. But what becomes of land where no one walks with truth? It dries up. Because the absence of conflict isn't peace. It's neglect. How many times did you hold back what you really thought? Not out of doubt, but fear of being less liked? How many times did you shrink to fit into spaces that were never made for your shape? The more you tried not to disappoint others, the more you disappointed yourself. Until one day a quiet question arose. Do they love me? Or just the version of me I've edited for them? The mirror that lies told you that being accepted was more important than being true. And so you got used to being chosen for reasons you don't understand, to being praised for traits that don't feel real, to receiving admiration that echoes through a place where your integrity used to live. Because the kind of love that comes for your silence is not love. It's a transaction. And no transaction built on self-erasure can survive without wound. The thirst for approval began as protection, but became a prison. You're surrounded by affection, yet forget to ask, does this love reach me, or only the performance? And maybe that's the deepest ache. Being loved and still feeling unseen. There comes a moment, quiet and irreversible, when you tire of begging for reflection, when you realize no one else's gaze will give back what you lost of yourself. No validation will ever fill the gap of not recognizing your own soul. And then, slowly, almost trembling, you approach the mirror, not to be approved but simply to see who's still there under all the costumes. And what you see isn't perfect, nor impressive, but it's real. And for the first time, that's enough. You look into your own eyes like someone meeting a forgotten friend. You notice the lines, the shadows, the stories they carry. You see the strength of someone who survived pretending, and the tenderness of someone who still longs to be. And in that gaze, without an audience, something begins to dissolve. The character, exhausted, asks to rest. The child, hidden, asks for home. And you realize you were never meant to be flawless, just allowed. The mirror is still there, but now it shows something new. The presence of someone who no longer wants applause for a role. Someone willing to disappoint if it means coming back to self. And that choice, so quiet, is a beginning. There is no audience, but there is relief. There is truth. And there's a whisper inside that says, now, I'm finally coming home. Once you see yourself clearly, something changes. You no longer need others to think it's beautiful for it to be real. It's not arrogance. It's arrival. A quiet arrival into the space you once left behind. You start returning what was never yours. The masks, the rehearsed lines, the polite smiles. Every return is a small liberation. You begin to say no without guilt. Say yes with presence. Step away from what doesn't fit, not as rejection, but as care. And you're surprised to find that loneliness, when it follows truth, is lighter than the crowd earned by performance. Silence, once feared, becomes shelter. And the space left by the absence of applause fills with something sturdier. Self-respect. The mirror no longer lies because you no longer ask. You stop pleading for reflection. Now you walk and listen to your own voice, your own rhythm, your own breath. And that listening, flawed and trembling but honest, begins to guide your path. The choices change. The presence shifts, the gaze deepens, and you realize that freedom was never about doing everything you want. It was about no longer needing to prove who you are. The day you stop needing to see yourself in any reflection is the day you begin to inhabit your own skin. Not because you feel whole, resolved, or enough, but because finally you feel present, even with your imperfections. You no longer walk asking what they think. You walk asking, am I at peace? And that question, quiet and deep, begins to rearrange everything. Some will drift away, surprised by your refusal to perform. Others will draw near, drawn by your aliveness. But none of that will be the center, because now you have you. And that changes everything. The thirst for approval doesn't vanish overnight. It retreats. It becomes small next to the presence that expands when you return to yourself. When you stop seeking applause and begin simply being, You begin choosing yourself, not to shut the world out, but to finally build a home. And in this home, there are no mirrors on every wall. There are windows, open windows. Because now you no longer need to see yourself to know you're here. It's enough to feel the wind, to hear your breath, to remember there's a place inside you where no performance is required, and the phrase that echoes when the clapping stops. When you stop chasing reflection, you begin becoming presence. If you too are tired of reshaping yourself to fit, write what you no longer wish to please. Return here whenever you forget who you are and need to remember without a mirror.